You are exhausted, not in your muscles, in your performance. Every morning you wake up and strap on a face that is not your own, a smile calibrated for approval, a silence measured to avoid conflict. You have spent so many years scanning rooms, reading micro-expressions, adjusting your posture, your laugh, your opinions, that you no longer remember the sound of your own voice when there is no audience to please. This is not living. This is a rented house, decorated with the applause of strangers, and you are terrified of being evicted. Look at yourself, not the version you project on screens or in conversations. The version that sits alone at 3 in the morning when the performance has exhausted you. That version knows the truth. Your life has become a negotiation with everyone else's expectations. You have outsourced your sense of safety to the very people who benefit from your weakness. They do not even know they are your captors. Most of them are not malicious. They simply prefer you small, manageable, predictable. Every time you contort yourself to avoid disappointing them, you reinforce the bars of a cage you built yourself. And here is the darkest part of this uncomfortable truth. You have become addicted to the approval that imprisons you. There is a chemical relief when someone nods, when a post is liked, when a superior says you did well. That relief is not freedom. It is a dose of anesthetic that keeps you asleep while your authenticity bleeds out in silence. You have learned to scan rooms before speaking, to measure your worth by the flicker on another face, and in doing so, you have handed over the keys to your own mind to 1,000 strangers who do not even know they hold them. The Stoics called this slavery of the soul. Epictetus, a man born in actual chains, warned that the greatest prison is not made of iron. It is made of the need for external validation. He knew that a man who depends on the opinions of others can never be rich in peace, because he spends his life begging for a currency that loses value the moment he receives it. And Marcus Aurelius, the most powerful man on earth, reminded himself in his private journal, written for no one's eyes but his own, that very little is needed for a happy life, and it is all within yourself, in your way of thinking, not in your way of performing. But you have been performing so long that the performance feels like survival. You think if you stop, the world will fall away. You might even be right. Some people will leave when you stop being what they need you to be. Some doors will close. Some applause will go silent. And that is the point. What I am about to offer you in the minutes ahead is not a self-help list. It is a quiet war strategy. By the end of this video, you will understand that the version of yourself that nothing can break already exists inside you. It has been buried under noise, under distraction, under fear, and under the heavy weight of other people's opinions. Your job is not to add more to your life, not more habits, not more productivity, not more striving to be liked. Your job is to subtract, silently, deliberately, permanently, to chip away at everything false, like a sculptor removing marble to reveal the figure that was always there. 10 things. You will be asked to eliminate them quietly, without announcement, without permission, without telling anyone. Because the moment you announce your transformation, you invite resistance, you invite doubt, you invite the very people who benefit from your weakness to suddenly have opinions about your strength. This removal must be a private reckoning, witnessed by no one but yourself. And if you stay until the very end, you will find that the silence left behind is not emptiness. It is the first breath of your own existence, raw and untamed, a force that no approval can build and no rejection can destroy. That is the mental shield no one can ever truly break. The evening had begun like any other. In a modest villa just outside Rome, Lucius Annaeus Seneca sat at a simple wooden table, the flicker of oil lamps casting long shadows against the wall. Beside him was his wife, Paulina, younger than him by many years, but bound to him by something deeper than affection, by a shared stillness of soul. A few close friends were present, and the meal was unremarkable. Bread, olives, watered wine. There was no excess, no performance. The man who had once been the most powerful advisor to an emperor had long since stripped his life down to its essentials. The marble floors were cold. Outside, the Mediterranean night was quiet. For a man living under the silent menace of a paranoid ruler, this was as close to peace as he could expect. Then came the knock. Not the knock of a neighbor or a messenger, but the heavy, deliberate fist of the Praetorian Guard. A centurion, named Gavius Silvanus, stepped into the lamplight, his armor clinking faintly. He was not there to arrest Seneca. He was there to deliver a single, irreversible sentence from the Emperor Nero: death. The former tutor, the man who had shaped the young emperor's mind and held the empire together while Nero indulged his monstrous appetites, was now ordered to end his own life before the night grew any older. The charge was conspiracy, a lie so thin it barely needed to be spoken. Nero simply wanted Seneca gone, and the words of an emperor required no evidence. Any ordinary man would have shattered. Betrayal of this magnitude, the student murdering the teacher, would have broken most spirits into desperate pleading or furious rage. But Seneca received the news the way a mountain receives rain. The centurion, perhaps expecting terror or tears, found himself facing an unsettling calm. Seneca did not raise his voice. He did not curse the emperor. He did not ask why, because he already knew why. Power is rarely satisfied with obedience. It demands the annihilation of those who have witnessed its vulnerability. Seneca had seen Nero before the madness fully consumed him, and for that, there could be no forgiveness. Seneca turned to his friends and asked to see his will, a final attempt to pass on his modest remaining possessions to those he loved. The centurion refused. On Nero's orders, even this small dignity was denied. A lifetime of accumulating wisdom, property, and influence, and in the end, he could not give away a single coin. Most men would have crumbled at this final insult. Seneca merely nodded. He had spent years preparing for this precise moment, not by hoarding power, but by quietly eliminating his attachment to it. In his letters to Lucilius, he had written that no man can be impoverished if he has already let go of everything. Now the theory was being tested in the fire, and the fire found nothing left to burn. He turned to Paulina. This is where the history tightens into something almost unbearable to witness. He told her he would not command her to live or to die. The choice was hers, as free as his own. But Paulina, whose soul had been forged in the same quiet philosophy, did not hesitate. She asked only that they leave this life together, that the bond they shared in wisdom might be sealed in death. Seneca did not weep. He did not protest. He looked at his wife with a love so deep it had no need for desperation. And he agreed. They would bleed out side by side, a final act of silent defiance against a tyranny that could take their bodies but never their wills. Using a small blade, Seneca opened the veins in his arms, his legs, behind his knees. The blood came slowly. Age and a sparse diet had constricted his vessels. The physical pain was significant, but his attention was elsewhere. He dictated his final thoughts to a scribe as the life drained from him, not because he wanted to be remembered, but because the act of teaching calmed his mind. He spoke of the immortality of the soul, of the relief of leaving a world drenched in corruption. He asked Paulina to remove herself to another room, not to abandon her, but because he could not bear the sight of her suffering alongside him. He loved her too much to let his death become her agony. Soldiers, on Nero's secret command, intervened to save Paulina's life. Her wrists were bound, the bleeding stopped, and she was forced back from the precipice. Seneca did not rage. He accepted even this. The death did not come easily. The blood did not flow fast enough. He asked for hemlock, the poison that had silenced Socrates, but even that was slow to act. Finally, he was carried to a warm bath, the steam easing his breath. As he was lowered into the water, He splashed some onto the attending servants, a small gesture that he intended as a libation to Jupiter the Liberator. Whether the gods received it or not, the man was already free. In that rising steam, Lucius Annaeus Seneca stopped breathing. The empire had murdered its philosopher, but it could not murder his peace. Why are you being told this story? Because that night in the villa was not an isolated act of bravery. It was the visible result of years of invisible work. Seneca had not woken up that morning and decided to be calm. He had spent decades practicing the elimination of everything that makes a tyrant, or a circumstance, powerful over your soul. He had quietly subtracted his need for the emperor's approval long before Nero ever signed a death warrant. He had meditated on the reality of his own death so frequently that when it finally arrived, it was not a stranger. It was a guest he recognized. This is the power of premeditated elimination. What you remove in the quiet years will serve you in the loud hours of crisis. Now the question turns to you. What must you begin subtracting today, so that when your own test arrives, and it will, you face it with hands that do not tremble? The Stoic path to an unbreakable life is not a path of accumulation. It is a quiet, deliberate act of removal. You are not here to build a taller fortress. You are here to identify the hidden drains in your soul, the false supports you lean on that keep you weak, and eliminate them without a single witness. This is the private surgery that separates those who merely survive from those who become truly unshakable. 7 layers must be stripped away, and each one will feel like a small death before it feels like freedom. The first elimination is your debt to the eyes of others. You have spent years scanning rooms, calibrating your words, and mortgaging your authenticity for the fleeting comfort of approval. The Stoic truth is harsh. Other people's opinions live in their minds, not yours. Epictetus called it slavery. Every time you over-explain your decisions or shrink your truth to avoid a frown, you hand a piece of your soul to someone who never paid for it. Quietly stop. Let them misunderstand you. Your need to be liked is the softest chain you wear, yet it holds the heaviest weight. Remove it, and you will taste a silence that feels like the first breath of actual power. The second elimination is the echo of complaint. Habitual complaining is not a release. It is a dye that stains the fabric of your mind, turning your entire existence the color of grievance. Marcus Aurelius knew that the soul takes on the hue of its thoughts. When you constantly narrate what is wrong, your brain becomes a specialist in finding misery, reinforcing neural pathways that make suffering your default lens. The modern trap is bonding through shared dissatisfaction. The Stoic response is to replace the question, "Why is this happening to me?" with, "What does this require of me?" Starve the echo, and you will find an energy you didn't know you had been wasting. The third elimination is the ritual sacrifice of comparison. In an age where you compare your raw, unedited existence to the curated highlights of millions, you have sentenced yourself to permanent inadequacy. Seneca warned that no man can be content with his own lot if he peers over his neighbor's fence. But the deeper trap is using comparison to fuel a victim identity, weaving a story of what you were denied until it becomes the architecture of your entire personality. The Stoic separates fact from narrative. Something happened. That is history. But what you tell yourself about its meaning is a choice, and that choice can be unmade. Stop counting what others have. Start measuring only what you do with what remains in your control. The fourth elimination is the unspoken contract with those who drain your spirit. Not people who challenge you, but those whose presence consistently leaves you smaller and more depleted. Marcus Aurelius prepared himself each morning to meet the ungrateful and the arrogant, but he did not hand them the keys to his inner citadel. You have a quiet obligation to protect your time, the one resource you cannot recover. You do not need a dramatic confrontation. You simply redirect your energy. Some relationships are not meant to be permanent. They are seasons that have passed. Let the autumn leaves fall without guilt. The space they leave behind will soon be filled by those who sharpen your soul. The fifth elimination is your quiet divorce from the machine in your hand. You have voluntarily handed your attention to algorithms engineered to hijack your consciousness. Marcus Aurelius wrote that the mind free from passions is an impregnable citadel, yet you toss the gate open 100 times a day to a glass rectangle designed to keep you fragmented and anxious. This is not about abandoning technology. It is about ending your enslavement to it. Reclaim the first and last minutes of your day. Sit in the discomfort of silence without reaching for a screen. That anxiety you feel is information. It reveals how much of your inner peace you have outsourced. Starve the machine, and the citadel begins to repair itself. The sixth elimination is your unrelenting rehearsal of death. You live in a suspended state, waiting for a perfect future that excuses you from living fully now. When I lose the weight, when I get the promotion, when the relationship is secure, then I will really begin. Seneca called this the greatest waste of life, preparing to live instead of living. Meanwhile, the weeks are rushing past, and you have only a finite number of them. The Stoic does not abandon ambition. He closes the gap between the life he is waiting for and the one he is living today. Release your white-knuckled grip on outcomes you cannot control. Do what is yours to do, and then let the arrow fly. What happens after it leaves your bow is not your burden to carry. The seventh elimination lies at the deepest core of your being, the false self you have performed for the world. Somewhere along the way, you learned that the real you was not acceptable, so you constructed a persona that laughs at jokes it doesn't find funny, hides ambitions that might make others uncomfortable, and shrinks itself into a shape that attracts the least resistance. This survival strategy once protected you. Now it imprisons you. Marcus Aurelius insisted that a happy life requires very little and is built only in your way of thinking, not your way of performing. Let the performer die quietly. No announcement. No new performance of authenticity. Just a private, terrifying commitment to speak your truth, pursue your desire, and inhabit your own existence without apology. This final subtraction does not leave you empty. It leaves you real. And a man who is real is a man whom no tyrant, no circumstance, and no betrayal can ever truly break. You have now walked through the fire of 7 eliminations. What remains is not a void, but a silence you have been running from your entire life. That silence feels heavy right now, almost unbearable, because for years you filled it with noise, the chatter of approval, the rhythm of complaint, the endless scroll, the performance of a self that was never truly yours. That noise was not a companion, it was a sedative. And now that it is gone, you are left with nothing but the raw, unadorned fact of your own existence. Most people never reach this point. They retreat back into the noise the moment the silence becomes uncomfortable. But you are not most people. Not if you have come this far, and certainly not if you are still listening. The Stoics understood that this threshold, this terrifying emptiness, is not a breakdown. It is a forge. When Epictetus was shackled in a Roman slave market, his body was property, but his mind was a kingdom no buyer could purchase. When Marcus Aurelius buried his children and watched his empire convulse with plague and war, he had every justification to collapse into despair. He chose instead to write that the impediment to action advances action, and that what stands in the way becomes the way. They did not possess resources you lack. They possessed a decision. They decided that their internal sovereignty was not negotiable, and in the silence after everything was stripped away, they discovered a power that no circumstance could corrode. Now the question turns to you with brutal simplicity. Are you still going to beg for scraps at the table of other people's opinions? Are you still going to wait for a perfect tomorrow that absolves you of living fully today? The victim identity you wore for so long may have once been a shelter, but now it is a tomb. You have quietly eliminated the false self that performed for the world. The performer is dead. There is no audience left to applaud or condemn. All that remains is the quiet, terrifying, magnificent truth of who you actually are when nobody is watching. And that version of you, the one unburdened by the need to be liked, to be validated, to be understood, is the version that nothing can break. This is the psychological shift. It is not a feeling of happiness. It is not an emotional high that will fade by morning. It is a structural change in the architecture of your soul. It is the moment you stop being a victim of your environment and become its sculptor. You stop asking, "Why is this happening to me?" and start asking, "What is this moment demanding of my character?" You stop gripping outcomes with desperate fingers and instead pour your entire being into the only thing you ever truly owned, your response. Marcus Aurelius called the mind a citadel. It is not built from stone or status. It is built from 1,000 small, unwitnessed decisions to stop outsourcing your peace. For too long, you believed that strength meant adding more accomplishments, more possessions, more validation. Now you know the ancient secret. Strength is subtraction. The marble block hides the statue, and the sculptor's only task is to remove everything that is not the figure. You have been chipping away at the excess, quietly, without permission, without announcement. What emerges from the dust is not a new person. It is the original one, the one who existed before the world told you what to fear, what to want, and who to be. That person is not fragile. That person does not flinch at rejection, because rejection cannot touch a soul that has already let go of needing acceptance. That person does not panic in chaos, because chaos is simply the environment, and the inner citadel stands regardless of the weather outside. Now you must make a choice. You can walk away from this video and, within hours, slip back into the old grooves, the familiar performances, the comfortable chains. The world will happily receive you back. It loves compliant actors. Or you can sit in the silence you have created and decide that this time, the subtraction is permanent. No going back. No rebuilding the false self from the rubble. This choice will not be celebrated. There will be no applause for the man who stops dancing for the crowd. Some people will call you cold, distant, difficult. Let them. Their discomfort is the sound of your freedom taking root. The Stoic path is not for those who seek comfort. It is for those who seek sovereignty. And sovereignty is a lonely throne before it becomes an unshakable kingdom. Take a breath. Look around the quiet room of your mind. The noise has stopped. The opinions have faded. The false self lies discarded. What you are experiencing now is not emptiness. It is space. Space to move, to breathe, to choose without the weight of 1,000 invisible judges. This is your inheritance as a human being, the only thing that cannot be taken from you by emperors, by betrayals, by loss, or by time. You have unmade what you were not. Now you are free to become what you are. The sculptor stands before the finished work, and the work is simply, finally, undeniably you. No one can take that away. And now, nothing ever will. The dust has settled. The noise has withdrawn to a distant hum you can barely hear. What remains around you is not the life you once recognized. The crowded rooms, the desperate performances, the invisible chains you mistook for safety. That life has been dismantled, not by catastrophe, but by a quiet, deliberate act of removal. You did not add a single thing to become stronger. You simply stopped carrying what was never yours to hold. This is the Stoic secret that empires forget, and that slaves, philosophers, and emperors rediscover in the darkest hours. The power is not in accumulation. The power is in the empty space where illusion used to live. Think of the marble that Michelangelo approached. He did not inject David into the stone. He looked at the raw block and saw what needed to be taken away. Every chip of the chisel was a subtraction, a small violence against the excess, until what remained was a form so true that centuries later people still stand before it in silence. Your life is that block. For years, you walked around believing you were the excess, the fear, the approval-seeking, the complaint, the false smile. But you were never those things. You were the figure beneath them, waiting for the sculptor. And the sculptor was always you. The eliminations you have made, witnessed by no one, announced to no one, were the chisel strokes. Now you stand on the other side of the work, not as a finished creation, because no human ever finishes, but as something infinitely closer to the truth. The world will not applaud this transformation. It rarely does. The world is a marketplace of distractions, and it profits from your fragmentation. It will try to fill your new silence with urgency, with notifications, with manufactured crises that feel like obligations. It will send people who miss the old, manageable version of you, who will gently tug at your sleeves and ask why you seem different, why you no longer laugh as easily at what is not funny, why your boundaries have become walls. Let them wonder. You are not required to explain. The quiet you have cultivated is not a performance of mystery. It is the natural habitat of a mind that has stopped outsourcing its peace. Seneca would remind you that a man who lives according to nature will never be poor, and a man who lives according to opinion will never be rich. You are now richer than most kings, because your wealth is not stored in the approval of strangers or the outcomes you cannot command. It is stored in the unshakable stillness of your own soul. This is the power of the dust, of the remnant. The ancient Stoics understood that every empire crumbles, every reputation fades, every body returns to the earth. What cannot crumble is the integrity of a mind that has learned to stand alone, not in loneliness, but in sovereign self-possession. You are now that mind. You have removed the need for validation, the addiction to complaint, the poison of comparison, the draining contracts, the digital leash, the identity of victimhood, the lie of the perfect future, the exhausting habit of justification, the death grip on outcomes, and the false self that performed for a world that barely noticed. What remains is not a shell, it is a seed that contains the entire architecture of a life that no storm can uproot. Now, a moment of silence stretches before you, not an awkward pause to be filled, but a sacred emptiness in which the next chapter will be written. You have a choice. You can return to the noise, piece by piece, convincing yourself that a little compromise is harmless, or you can guard this silence as the most valuable possession you have ever held, knowing that the person who controls their inner world controls the only empire that truly matters. The path forward does not require you to become louder, more visible, or more validated. It requires you to remain subtracted, to wake each morning and ask not, "What will I gain today?" but, "What am I still carrying that I can quietly put down?" If these words have created even a small clearing in the forest of your mind, the most powerful action you can take right now is to sit in that clearing and do nothing. Let the silence teach you what noise never could. And if you feel a quiet urge to support this channel's ability to continue carving out such spaces for others, a simple gesture, a like, a subscription, reaches me across the distance without breaking your silence. I read what you share, so if you are moved to do so, tell me quietly. Of the 10 things we explored, which one are you setting down first? Not for approval, not for applause, just as a marker in the sand for your own journey. Until our paths cross again, stay grounded in what is real, stay clear in what is true, and remember the ancient refrain that has guided the unbroken for millennia. The obstacle is not your enemy. The obstacle is the way. Now walk forward, not into noise, but into the vast, quiet landscape of your own becoming.